Vladimir Putin watched one of his closest allies get dragged out of bed by American commandos, and he said nothing, not a word. I need you to understand what just happened here, because this isn't just about Venezuela. This is about the entire architecture of Russian power collapsing in real time. 3 days ago, Delta Force operators landed in Caracas at 2 a.m. local time. They cut through steel doors with military-grade blowtorches, extracted Nicolás Maduro and his wife from their bedroom inside Fort Tiuna, blindfolded them, cuffed them, and flew them to New York on a Navy assault ship. The whole operation took less than 5 hours. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Russia had supplied Venezuela with billions of dollars worth of air defense systems, S-300 VMs, Buk M2E missiles, Pantsir systems. These are supposed to be the crown jewels of Russian military exports, the same technology Russia uses to defend its own airspace. And they didn't fire a single shot. Reports are now confirming that U.S. forces destroyed multiple Russian-made defense systems before they could even activate. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth actually mocked Putin publicly, saying, "Seems those Russian air defenses didn't quite work so well, did they?" But that's not even the real story. The real story is what Putin didn't do. Because just 8 months ago, this same Vladimir Putin was standing in the Kremlin with Maduro, signing what they called a strategic partnership treaty. They called each other eternal friends. Putin praised Hugo Chávez's legacy. Maduro talked about how Russia would help Venezuela stand against American imperialism. There were red carpets, photo ops, champagne toasts. Maduro even attended Putin's Victory Day parade in Moscow in May, sitting in a place of honor next to Xi Jinping. And now, Maduro is sitting in a federal detention center in Manhattan, wearing prison clothes, pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism charges. His wife Celia has broken ribs from the extraction, and Vladimir Putin has not said a single word about it publicly. Think about that for a second. Russia's foreign ministry released a statement calling it unacceptable armed aggression. Foreign Minister Lavrov made a phone call to Venezuela's acting president. And that's it. That's the entire Russian response to watching their closest ally in Latin America get snatched in the middle of the night. But here's what kept me up last night. There's a meme going viral on Russian social media right now. It shows Putin's famous quote, "We don't give up on our own." And next to it are photos of all the leaders he's made that promised to. There's Muammar Gaddafi, toppled and killed in 2011, Viktor Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president who fled to Moscow in 2014, Bashar al-Assad, who was just overthrown in December and is now living in isolated exile in Moscow, and now Maduro, who's facing life in an American prison. The pattern is devastating. Russian military bloggers are not hiding their fury. One prominent war correspondent wrote to his 500,000 followers, "Judging by the footage from Venezuela, U.S. forces encountered no resistance in the air or on the ground. I cannot imagine Russian helicopters operating freely over Kyiv." Another channel with 600,000 followers said, claiming now that the operation in Caracas was nonsense and that Russia could do much better if given the order is crude, chest-thumping patriotism. They're openly comparing this to Russia's failed attempt to capture Kyiv in February 2022. Remember that? Putin sent his elite forces to decapitate the Ukrainian government. They were supposed to take Kyiv in 3 days. Almost 4 years later, they're still fighting. The Americans did in 5 hours what Russia couldn't do in 4 years. And the Russian military blogger community is painfully aware of this. One of them joked, "The Americans snatched Maduro. We snatched a raccoon from Kherson," referring to animals taken from a zoo during Russia's humiliating retreat from that Ukrainian city. But wait, it gets worse. Sources are now revealing something that changes everything about this story. There was a CIA source inside Maduro's inner circle. Someone very close to the Venezuelan president was feeding information to American intelligence for months. They knew exactly where Maduro slept, what he ate, where he traveled, even the layout of his safe room. And this is what terrifies Putin more than anything else. According to analysts at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Putin is most frightened by the fact that in Maduro's coterie, there was a person who leaked information to Americans. Because Putin has always been paranoid about betrayal. And now he's watching one of his closest allies get taken down by someone in their own inner circle. What I'm about to tell you explains why Putin is staying silent. There's a theory circulating among Russia experts right now that Putin and Trump may have discussed Venezuela during their summit in Anchorage, Alaska last August. The idea is that Putin essentially wrote off Maduro in exchange for something related to Ukraine. Now, I can't verify this theory, but what I can tell you is that Putin's behavior only makes sense if he decided Venezuela wasn't worth fighting for. Think about it. Russia had a defense cooperation treaty with Venezuela. They had billions invested in weapons, oil partnerships, and intelligence operations. Venezuela was Russia's most important foothold in the Western Hemisphere, their way of projecting power into America's backyard. And Putin just let it go, the same way he let Assad go in December. Here's the timeline that should worry every Russian ally around the world. December 2024. Assad's regime collapses in Syria. Russian air defenses fail to stop the rebel advance. Assad flees to Moscow on a Russian military plane. Putin doesn't lift a finger to save him. January 2026. Maduro gets extracted by American forces. Russian air defenses get destroyed before they can activate. Putin doesn't lift a finger to save him. Do you see the pattern? Russian state media is actually trying to spin this as a positive. They're saying Trump's actions prove that international law is dead, that only force matters now, and that this gives Russia carte blanche to do whatever it wants in Ukraine. But that's copium of the highest order. Because here's the reality. Putin couldn't save Maduro even if he wanted to. Russia's military is completely tied down in Ukraine. They've lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Their economy is under crippling sanctions. They can barely project power into their own neighborhood, let alone across an ocean to Venezuela. Documents reveal that Maduro actually sent Putin a desperate plea in October. He asked for missiles, radar systems, repairs for his Russian fighter jets, drones, and a financing plan. According to reports, it's not even clear if Moscow ever responded. Putin left him hanging. And now every country that thought Russia would protect them is asking the same question. What exactly is a Russian security guarantee worth? The Atlantic Council put it bluntly. With Maduro's fall, another Russian client state bites the dust, reducing the value of a Kremlin security guarantee to slightly better than zero. But here's what nobody is talking about. This operation didn't just humiliate Putin. It actually helps him in some twisted ways. Wait, let me explain. Putin has been pushing a vision of the world where great powers dominate their spheres of influence. He invaded Ukraine because he believes Russia has a right to control its neighbors. He thinks the old rules about sovereignty don't apply to major powers. And now Trump just validated that worldview. The United States captured a sitting head of state, flew him out of his own country, and declared that America would run Venezuela. Trump literally said America is in charge now. For Putin, this is ideological ammunition. He can point to Venezuela and say, see, the Americans do exactly what they accuse us of doing. International law is a fiction. Only power matters. And that's a dangerous precedent because Putin has called Zelensky a criminal many times. He's called Ukraine's government illegitimate. If the U.S. can grab Maduro because it doesn't recognize his government, what's stopping Russia from trying the same thing with Zelensky? Analysts are genuinely worried about this. One former National Security Council director said he's setting a precedent and saying that it's okay for countries to go against the political sovereignty of another nation. The difference, of course, is capability. Russia tried to capture Zelensky in 2022. They failed spectacularly. Their paratroopers got slaughtered at Hostomel Airport. Their assassination squads got intercepted. Ukraine was prepared. Venezuela was not. And that brings us to the most important question. Why did Putin stay silent? I've been going through every expert analysis I can find, and there are essentially three theories. Theory one, Putin is playing the long game on Ukraine. This is the most likely explanation. Putin desperately wants a favorable peace deal in Ukraine. He's been trying to stay in Trump's good graces, avoiding anything that might provoke new sanctions or more weapons flowing to Kiev. What we're learning is that Putin has repeatedly rejected U.S. peace proposals, while Ukraine has said yes to several. But through careful diplomacy, Russia has avoided the harshest consequences. Putin isn't going to risk all that capital over Venezuela. When Trump was asked about Putin during his press conference about the Maduro operation, he said he was not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people. That's not the warm relationship Putin is hoping for. And the last thing he wants to do is give Trump a reason to take Ukraine's side more aggressively. Theory two, Russia literally cannot respond. This is the harsh reality that Russian military bloggers are openly acknowledging. Russia is a nuclear superpower, but its conventional military has limited ability to project power. The war in Ukraine has stretched, possibly exhausted their military. Their economy is badly weakened. They simply don't have the resources for adventures on the other side of the world. Venezuela was useful as a symbolic middle finger to Washington, but it was never worth a direct confrontation with the United States. And there's something else. Most of Venezuela's Russian-supplied military equipment wasn't even working. Sources are now revealing that out of 12 Buk M2E systems, only 5 were operational. The S-300V systems hadn't been combat ready for over a year. Most of their Su-30 fighter jets were grounded because Russia never delivered the spare parts. Putin sold Venezuela a shield made of paper. Theory 3. This was a tacit agreement. This is the most controversial theory, but multiple analysts are taking it seriously. The idea is that Putin and Trump may have reached some kind of understanding about spheres of influence. America gets a free hand in the Western Hemisphere. Russia gets something. Maybe reduced pressure on Ukraine, maybe future cooperation on Arctic development, maybe just a lack of interference. One German researcher suggested that discussions in Anchorage may have included concessions from Trump on Ukraine for the sake of future post-war joint development of hydrocarbons in Russia's Arctic regions, while Washington gains control over Greenland. Trump has been obsessed with acquiring Greenland. Putin has been obsessed with keeping Ukraine. Maybe they're both getting what they want. But here's what makes this situation truly remarkable. Putin's silence isn't just about strategic calculation. It's about fear. Think about what the Maduro operation demonstrated. The CIA had a source inside the Venezuelan government feeding them real-time intelligence. They knew everything, and they used that information to execute a flawless extraction. Putin watched this happen, and you better believe he's now looking at everyone in his inner circle wondering who might be the next American source. Carnegie Endowment analysts say Putin, with his paranoid conviction that everyone is after him, will firstly boost his own security. He's not thinking about revenge. He's thinking about survival. And there's one more layer to this that nobody is discussing. The operation might actually inspire Putin, not to defend his allies, but to try something similar himself. One expert actually suggested that Maduro's extraction may even inspire Putin to plan the kidnapping of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. Now, could Russia actually pull this off? Almost certainly not. Ukraine is far better defended than Venezuela was. Zelensky has survived multiple assassination attempts. The security around him is intense, but the precedent has been set, and Putin has been calling Zelensky a criminal for years, just like Trump called Maduro a criminal before grabbing him. The rules of the game have changed, and now we get to what this means for the future. Let me put this all together for you, because what we're witnessing is the end of an era. For decades, Russia positioned itself as the alternative to American hegemony. If you were a dictator who wanted protection from Washington, Moscow was there for you. They'd sell you weapons, give you diplomatic cover at the UN, and promise to stand with you against Western pressure. That brand is now destroyed. In the last year alone, Putin has lost Assad in Syria and Maduro in Venezuela. His air defense systems have failed spectacularly in both cases. His promises of protection have proven worthless. And Putin knows it. Russian propagandist Alexander Dugin, who's considered close to the Kremlin, had an interesting reaction. He said, "The capture of Maduro demonstrates that international law no longer exists. Only the law of force applies." But then he called for Russia to accelerate in Ukraine and prepare to fight the United States directly. He wrote, "If we do not destroy them now, they will destroy us tomorrow." That's not the response of someone who feels strong. That's panic. Other pro-Kremlin voices are even more revealing. One influential channel admitted they carried out the operation competently. This is probably what our special operations forces had in mind: fast, effective, and efficient. It's unlikely that Gerasimov planned to wage a war for 4 years. They're comparing Venezuela to their own failures in Ukraine, and they're not happy about the comparison. Now, here's what makes this situation even more complicated. Remember when I mentioned that strategic partnership treaty Putin and Maduro signed in May? Let me tell you what was actually in it. The agreement covered military cooperation, joint weapons development, intelligence sharing, economic partnerships in oil and gas, and even the installation of a Russian GLONASS navigation station in Venezuela. They added 350 new cooperation agreements to strengthen ties between the two countries. Putin called it a solid foundation for their relationship. 8 months later, that foundation crumbled in less than 5 hours. But here's the geopolitical shift that should concern everyone. And as Trump's intervention in Venezuela validates Putin's worldview, even as it humiliates him. Russia has argued for years that great powers should dominate their spheres of influence. Putin invaded Ukraine because he believes Russia has a right to control its near abroad. He's been pushing back against the post-World War II order that says countries can't just invade their neighbors. And now the United States just did exactly that in Latin America. The official justifications were about drug trafficking and protecting American security. But let's be honest, this was regime change. Trump captured a foreign leader because he didn't like him and because he wanted Venezuela's oil. Putin can now say, see, the Americans do it too. They just pretend otherwise. And this is where things get really dangerous. The implications for Taiwan are particularly concerning. China watches everything America does. If Washington can grab Maduro because it doesn't recognize his government and Beijing doesn't recognize Taiwan's independence, you see where this goes. One analyst put it perfectly. I think this is setting a very bad precedent for countries that China and Russia are looking to infringe upon, whether that's Taiwan or whether it's Ukraine. Trump might respond that there's no comparison, that Venezuela was ruled by a drug trafficking dictator while Taiwan is a democracy. And that's a fair point. But international norms don't work that way. Once you establish that great powers can grab leaders they don't like, everyone gets to play that game. But wait, there's another dimension to this that nobody's discussing. Venezuela wasn't just a symbolic ally for Russia. It was a strategic platform. Since Hugo Chavez took power in 1999, Russia has sold more than $20 billion in weapons and military equipment to Venezuela. Moscow maintained intelligence networks in the country. They were invited multiple times to build or manage a naval base in the southern Caribbean. Russian corporations had massive oil partnerships, including a $600 million joint venture with Venezuela's state oil company. Every time Washington tightened sanctions on Russia, whether over Crimea, the poisoning of the Skripals, or the invasion of Ukraine, Russia could flash its Venezuela card. State media would highlight Russian warships docking in the Caribbean just as new sanctions were announced. Lavrov would fly into Caracas as if to say, we're in your backyard too. That leverage is now gone. The listening posts, likely compromised. The optics of Russian power projection, shattered by a 5-hour extraction mission the whole world watched. Venezuela as a pressure valve against American policy, ripped away completely. Russia's illusion of global reach took a devastating blow on January 3rd. And Putin knows it. Now, what about Russia's immediate response? They've backed Venezuela's new acting president, Delcy Rodriguez. They've expressed solidarity with the Venezuelan government. They've demanded Maduro's release. Russia's UN ambassador gave an angry speech at the Security Council, calling the operation a turn back to the era of lawlessness. And that's probably all they'll do. Because Putin can't afford to escalate. He needs to stay on Trump's good side for Ukraine. He can't project military power to Latin America. And frankly, Venezuela stopped being useful to him the moment Maduro got on that helicopter. The strategic calculation is simple. Let America have its victory in the Western Hemisphere. Save Russian resources for the fight that actually matters, Ukraine. But there's a cost to this calculation that goes far beyond Venezuela. Every remaining Russian ally is watching. Iran is watching. North Korea is watching. Various African governments that rely on Russian military support are watching. Central Asian dictators who thought Moscow would protect them are watching. And they're all asking the same question. If America came for us, would Russia actually help? Or would we end up like Maduro, like alone, abandoned, and sitting in an American prison? The answer increasingly is clear. Let me give you some concrete examples of what this means. Russia has been expanding its presence in Africa through the Wagner Group and its successor organizations. They've got mercenaries in Mali, Libya, Sudan, the Central African Republic, and several other countries. They promise these governments protection from Western interference and internal threats. But what happens when one of those African leaders gets in trouble? What happens when France or the United States decides they've had enough of a particular regime? Assad found out in December. Maduro found out last weekend. The pattern is unmistakable. And here's the economic dimension that makes this even worse for Putin. Officials are now saying that Trump intends to put Venezuelan oil back on the global market. Venezuela has some of the largest proven oil reserves in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia's. That oil has been under sanctions for years, keeping it off the market and supporting higher global prices. If Venezuelan production comes back online, it will drive down oil prices worldwide, and that directly hits Putin's war chest. Russia's economy depends on hydrocarbon exports. Lower oil prices mean less money for weapons, less money for soldiers, less money for the war in Ukraine. Trump has explicitly said he wants to drive down oil prices for American consumers. Venezuelan oil is how he plans to do it. So Putin gets humiliated, loses an ally, watches his weapons fail, sees his global network of clients start to question their relationship with Moscow, and takes an economic hit that will make fighting in Ukraine even harder. And he can't do anything about it. There's one more thing I need to address before we finish. Some analysts are speculating that Putin might actually benefit from this situation in unexpected ways. The argument goes like this. Trump's brazen action proves that great powers can do whatever they want in their spheres of influence. This validates Putin's entire foreign policy philosophy and gives him moral cover to be even more aggressive in Ukraine and the former Soviet space. There's some truth to this argument. Putin has always complained about Western hypocrisy, about how America lectures other countries about sovereignty while doing whatever it wants. Now, he has the perfect example to point to. But here's why I think that argument is ultimately wrong. Moral arguments don't win wars. Military capability does. And what Venezuela revealed is that Russian military capability is vastly overstated. Those S-300 systems that failed in Caracas, they're the same technology Russia is using in Ukraine. Those Buk missiles that got destroyed before they could fire, Russia sells those around the world as their frontline air defense. The whole world just watched American forces walk through Russian-built defenses like they weren't even there. That's not a propaganda win for Putin. That's a sales disaster for Russia's defense industry. That's a credibility collapse for Russian military power. And Putin knows it. That's why he's staying silent, because there's nothing he can say that makes this look good. So where do we go from here? Trump has declared that America is in charge of Venezuela now. He's hinted that acting President Delcy Rodriguez will stay in power only as long as she does what we want. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado is calling for the legitimate election winner, Edmundo Gonzalez, to be recognized as president and oversee a democratic transition. Venezuela's future is uncertain, but Russia's role in it is over. Putin will continue making statements through his foreign ministry. He'll continue expressing solidarity with whoever ends up running Venezuela. He might even try to maintain some economic relationships if sanctions allow. But the strategic partnership is dead. The military cooperation is finished. The dream of a Russian foothold in America's backyard has been shattered. That's the new world we're living in. One where Russian security guarantees are worth nothing, where American power can reach anywhere it wants, and where Vladimir Putin can only watch as his global network crumbles piece by piece. First, it was Assad in Syria. Now it's Maduro in Venezuela. Who's next? Iran, North Korea, one of Russia's African client states. Putin built his reputation on being a reliable ally to autocrats around the world. That reputation is now in ruins. And no amount of angry UN speeches or demands for Maduro's release will change that fact. I'm curious what you think about this. Does Putin's silence make him look weak, or is he playing a smarter game than we realize? Is this the beginning of Russia's decline as a global power, or is Putin setting up for something none of us can see coming? And what does it mean for Ukraine if Putin decides the lesson from Venezuela is that only brutal force matters? Let me know in the comments, because I genuinely believe we're watching a fundamental shift in how the world works. And I want to know if you see it the same way I do.